Hi everyone, I'm Megan McCollum. I teach adapted physical education and special education in Robbinsdale area schools. I am the MinShape webmaster as well as the Shape America Central District Executive Director. Today I'm going to be talking to you about gamification. I'm super passionate about it because it is really engaging, and it's something that I learned about when I was getting my master's in educational technology through Minnesota State University Mankato. Professor that I had used gamification in a couple of my courses, and it just was really engaging and it motivated me to do my work. I was teaching full-time while getting my master's, and I would run home, well, not run home, but I would drive home, and I was just so excited to actually get to do my work, and I was really motivated to go back home even after a long day of work and meetings and everything that I went through while teaching, and then went home and I was excited to do my work because it was gamified, and it really drove me to want to do it more. I was really passionate about it. So I ended up doing my master's thesis on gamification so I could learn more about it and start to implement it in my own classes. So what is gamification? Gamification is a way to incorporate video game elements into your curriculum in order to engage and motivate learners. It also helps with student retention or retention of information for students. One thing that I really like about it is that it's not a curriculum, so you don't have to recreate your entire curriculum. It's more of a framework that you can use with your current curriculum. So who does it benefit? It benefits everyone. So like I said, I did my master's thesis on gamification, and I had to read a lot of research papers about it, and every research paper I read said that it benefited women, men, people of all ages. Most of the studies that I read were completed on college students because it was college professors who were doing research on the gamification, and so they just used their classes for gamification, and they showed that men and women, if they had been gamers or not gamers growing up or currently, they still were more engaged and more motivated to do their schoolwork because of the gaming elements and that sense of competition and intrinsic and extrinsic rewards that comes along with gamification. So how can you use it? The easiest way to use it is to just change some of the terms that you already are using in your classes. So instead of saying things like week 1, week 2, you could say level 1 and level 2. I'll get more into how you can use it later on, but these are just some ideas of how you can get started. And then you can also get more advanced with gamification as well. So you can use leaderboards, you can use badges, you can create usernames or have students create their own avatars. And I put in here, use whatever you're comfortable with. Don't overwhelm yourself. So it is a new concept for a lot of people. And a lot of times if you're trying to teach yourself something new or you're learning something new, it can be really overwhelming if you're struggling with it and you're not understanding it, but you want it to be successful for your students. So just take a step back, do as little or as much as you want with gamification, and just don't overwhelm yourself. Use things that you're familiar with. And again, I'll get more into that as I continue. So start small and you can add more as you go. That is what I have found as very helpful. I started using gamification this last year with my students, and until COVID happened and we had to quarantine and do distance learning, it was working out really great, and I was at the point where I was ready to start implementing more gamification strategies. And then we ended up having to do distance learning, and so it was a lot harder for me to try to build in new pieces for my students just because they were only used to one set of rules that I had created for my class. But if you ease your students into it and then you tell them, hey, we're going to try some more things. You might like them, you might not. But as long as you have an open mind and you're willing to try it, we're going to have fun. So the next question on here is it difficult to implement? It depends on your level of implementation. So like I said, it's more of a framework. So up front, it might be a bit of work for you. And it's something that you don't have to do all year long. You don't have to do it for every unit. You don't have to do it for every month. It could be we're going to try it for 1 week and see how it goes. We're going to try it for 1 unit, see how it goes. It's something that it's completely up to you. You're in control of it. And so again, don't overwhelm yourself. Make sure that you're doing things that are easy and simple to you and that you enjoy. If you'd like to just use some of the elements, that's the easiest way to get started. And then the more elements you use, obviously the more work it's going to be. But once you've created all of your framework for your courses, then it's super easy to maintain and you aren't going to have to make too many adjustments to what you're doing. So where have you seen gamification before? Gamification is very common. Businesses actually use it a lot. So I've got some examples here. Best Buy. So if you have your Best Buy rewards, it used to be My Reward Zone, and you get points. For every dollar you spend, you get points. Once you get enough points, you get a $5 coupon. Caribou Coffee, same, very similar process of gamification. It's the more money you spend, the more points you get, and then in return, you get a free coffee or a free snack. With Fitbit. So a lot of times people with Fitbits, they'll do challenges with their friends. So you can challenge your friends each week to see who can get the most steps. That's an example of gamification. So you've probably seen a lot of gamification, but you maybe just haven't realized that you've seen so much gamification before. So where to begin? The easiest elements to implement are changing your terms. So instead of, like I said, instead of saying week 1, week 2, week 3, you would say level 1, level 2, level 3. You could also use rooms, maps, instead of weeks, modules, or units. Using the term experience points or XPs instead of points for your assignments and grades. So instead of telling your students you got 10 out of 10 points this week, you could say you got 10 XPs or you got 10 experience points. And then with gamification and the point system, it also, you'll build up on your points. So rather than giving a student a number out of a certain number, out of a total number of points, you are just building up those points. So you might set your class to have 1,000 points and your students are trying to work toward that 1,000 points. One thing that one of my professors did was she said, okay, you are all space cadets and you're going to work your way through the ranks and you're working your way from Earth to the moon. So she had figured out how many miles it was from Earth to the moon, and that's what our points were. So our points were miles toward the moon. So throughout our entire course, we were trying to get close to the moon and be able to land on the moon by the end of the course. And that also, she put on a lot of work and was able to put together a whole theme and do that for us. So again, don't overwhelm yourself, but if that's something that sounds fun to you or you're interested in those kinds of things, certainly try to incorporate those into your classes. Calling assignments tasks, quests, journeys, or missions. So each week students have tasks or missions to complete in order to move from one level to another. So a lot of times my professor would say, you've got these tasks to complete. Once you're done with these tasks, you might find bonus tasks. Or she called them egg hunts in one of my classes. And so you go on an egg hunt and you find these eggs, and that's your homework assignments. So it could be something as simple as read a chapter, write a summary. But you call, instead of saying read a chapter, write a summary for your assignment, you could say read a chapter and then write a summary, and that is your mission for the week or for the day, or however you want to set it up. And then instead of having groups, so if you do a lot of group work in your classes, instead of calling your class groups, you could call them guilds, clans, or tribes. So again, these are all very basic, easy terms that you can start to incorporate. So it's a lot of just changing how your brain works and thinking more like a video gamer. So creating context gives students options for how to complete assignments. The more work they put in, the more XPs they receive. So for instance, one of my professors, she would tell us, okay, you have to read chapter 2 this week, and you can write a paper to summarize what you read, you'll get 10 XPs. But if you create a presentation summarizing what you read, you get 15 XPs. And then if you create a video summarizing what you read, you get 20 XPs. So the more work you put in, the more XPs you were able to get. And this was super helpful for me because, like I said, I was teaching full time. So some weeks, if I was heavy on my caseloads, I had a lot of due process paperwork to do, I maybe was only going to write a paper in summary or do a quick video, but it wouldn't have all of the fancy things that I had, tried to do in other weeks. And that it's kind of nice because then you can set what your standards are and what you want to try to achieve. So if you're a goal setter and you really want to get as many XPs as possible, you're going to try to do as much work as you can to demonstrate your information. And then from a teacher's perspective, that's also super helpful. So you're not sitting there just reading a ton of papers over and over and over about the same topics or the same chapter that you had your students read. You could be watching presentations, you could be watching videos. So the students are required to still cover the same content and still show you what they've learned, but how they choose to do that is up to them. I thought this was a super helpful way for me to differentiate my instruction also. So I had a friend who, she was terrible at writing papers. She hated to write papers, and so she always did presentations because she was more of a visual person. Whereas I enjoy writing papers. And so a lot of times I would just write a paper and then I'd be like, okay, this week, that's all I have time to do is quick write a paper. But then next week, I'm going to try to get some of those bonus XPs, get some of those extra points in there. So that brings me to my next point. If you offer extra credit points, you can call them bonus points or bonus XPs. And then you can take it up a notch by creating a storyline for your course. So have students on a journey through your course and have a goal or location to reach at the end. Kind of like how I said, work your way to the moon. Use a storyline or theme throughout your course. And then if students are on a mission to the moon, you would be the mission commander and they would be your cadets. Grades would be miles toward the moon instead of points or XPs. And that you could do either way. So I had said initially that each XP was 1 mile toward the moon. So you could do that, or you could do the grades for the end results. Another thing that my professor had done was we would have to complete assignments until we mastered them. So if we didn't master an assignment, we were given remedial work to continue working on, but we still were getting XPs. So even though some students might not be mastering the content that you're hoping they're mastering, you can still give them hope and give them that motivation to keep earning points, even if they are doing remedial work. And then the students that you do have that master that content, you can give them those bonus XPs. So altogether, the students, no matter what level they're at, they can be earning those XPs and getting points. And again, like I said, it motivates them to want to keep going. So level up. With XPs, you don't have to have a cap on points. Your students continue to earn points as they complete tasks, mission, quests, etc. All students begin with 0 XPs, and they work their way up through the ranks that you create. As a teacher, you will know how many points possible students can earn, but students will only know how many points they have earned. So typically, you would say, your class is worth 1,000 points, and you might even have that in your rubric, your syllabus, that your class is worth so many points. And in order for students to get an A, they have to have so many points out of your total points. A B is fewer points out of your total points, and so on and so forth. But with gamification, they all start at 0 points, and they have to work their way up to earn their grades. So you could still set like a expectation is this many points. A B expectation is this many points. And that's, again, you'll know how many points possible they could earn, but they are just looking at how many points am I gaining each time I complete a mission or each time I complete a task. And then again, if you choose to differentiate your assignments like I had talked about, your students will be able to earn different amounts of XPs based on how much work they choose to put into their assignments. If a student shows competency in a subject, you can allow him or her to unlock bonus XPs or hidden gems. If a student needs remedial work, he or she can earn bonus XPs by completing more work in the subject area where he or she is struggling. For example, in math, if I'm able to add and subtract, I can move on to multiplication and division. If I'm not able to add and subtract at a mastery level, I shouldn't move on. I should continue to work on addition and subtraction. So very similar in PE and adapted PE. If your student is able to use long-handled implements, they can keep going and play tennis or play softball or golf using those longer handled implements. But if you have students who are struggling, you're going to use shorter handled implements. It doesn't mean that they're not still working on the same skills. It just means that they're modified, how you're working with your students for those things. And then if your class is typically out of 100 points, you'll have your own set points for A, B, C, D, and F. And you can use those thresholds the same way. So you could say 91, 100 is an A. 80 to 89 is a B, etc. And that can be something that if you want to keep that traditional, just so that you're not confusing your students, you can do that. But you can also, like I said, say, you have to earn this many XPs to get an A, or this many XPs to get a B, and so on. In college, I had a professor who had told us, be context, not content. And that really resonated with me. I thought about it, and it was a really great way to say, your teaching should be student-centered, right? So everything that we're doing should be focused on our students, especially if you're teaching in special education or adapted physical education. Your students have individualized education plans, and so because of that, they need that specific ability to create their own learning and their own pathways. So giving them, here's what I want you to learn. Here's all of the content that I can give you, but it's up to you to create, to show me how you've learned and what you've learned. Get on my level. So now I'm going to start talking a little bit more about video game elements that you can be implementing in your classes. So leaderboards is one way that you can do that. This is something that I used in my classes this last year, and it really helped my students. Every day they would come into my class and they would check out the leaderboards to see where they're at and where their friends are at. And it was really kind of cool. It was exciting for them to come in every day, and they would even come in sometimes during passing time or when they weren't supposed to be in my class to check and see what their score was on the leaderboards. So leaderboards show a ranking of the students with the number of points that they have in the class. Allowing students to use usernames or gamer tags will give them some anonymity. You can use leaderboards without worrying that students will know who each other are unless they choose to share that information. So it's similar to a student or to you using student ID number to show them where they rank in class in comparison to others. So what I did with my students was I spent an entire day with them, an entire class period, and I told them they would be creating their own avatar. And it had to be something appropriate, because I was teaching at a middle school level, so of course they tried to push the boundaries, but I told them that it had to be something that was appropriate, and they could use, I gave them markers, crayons, colored pencils, and they could do an outline, they could trace something, they could kind of do whatever they wanted, and then they could color it in if they wanted, and that was going to be their avatar. And then with their avatar, they also had to create a username or a gamer tag. And a lot of my students were very into Fortnite and other video games. They loved playing Minecraft. And so they were very familiar with avatars and usernames and gamer tags. So for the most part, it was pretty quick and easy for them to just do that in one class period. A lot of times they wanted to, refine what they drew, or they didn't like it, so they had to start over. But I told them you get one class period, and if you want to fix it or change it, you can do that on your own time at home. So it was kind of a nice way for them to take a day and just color and be creative and not worry about, what do I have to learn today? What do I have to read today? What math do I have to work on? It was really nice for them just kind of lay back, and it was almost like a stress reliever for them. And then they got very excited to show their peers what their avatars looked like. And I used a wall in my room, like a bulletin board that I had, and I put all of their avatars up there with their usernames. They wrote the username underneath their avatar, and then I used that as like a decoration in my classroom. So that was up on one wall, and then they could come check the leaderboards every day or every couple days. And that's also where I put the leaderboards, was on that same wall. So leaderboards motivate students to try to move up in the rankings or hold their current position in class. This helps students to work harder and put more effort into their work. Leaderboards can be updated as often as the instructor chooses, so it could be after each assignment, at the end of the week, or whenever points are distributed. So for me, with my students, I had a lot of students that had a lot of behavior issues. So I focused this last year with gamification just on their behaviors in my class. I wanted to implement it more, but again, because we had to do distance learning, I wasn't able to get it as involved as I had hoped. And so my main focus was just having them come into class, be respectful, listen, be engaged, and just those very basic pieces of don't start hitting your friend with a pencil or throw books across the classroom. So my main focus was that. And so because of that, I was able to track points every day. I gave my students 5 points every day. They had to earn those points, and if they didn't earn the points, they didn't get points for the day. A lot of times, I know a lot of teachers do participation points, or did your students dress for class, or things like that. And I try to stay away from that just because I don't know if they're putting forth as much effort as they can. I mean, in PE when I was growing up, I didn't put forth much effort at all, but I was still able to do well in class. Whereas some of my peers who weren't as athletic really put forth a lot of effort, but they just weren't as successful. So to me, that wasn't a big stressor for me. I wouldn't give points on that. Most of my students, actually all my district is a Title I district, so a lot of my students are low income. They aren't required to change for class just because they may not have an extra set of clothes or an extra set of shoes. And so I didn't want to do points based on those things for my students. And then once I'm done with my slideshow, I can show you what I did do with my students, as well as some of their avatars. So a ranking structure. This again can be something that you could implement, you could not. It's totally up to you. So you could use a ranking structure instead of traditional grading. So instead of A, B, C, D, F, it could be commander, pilot, mission specialist, flight engineer, and cadet. I worked retail a lot of my life before I became a teacher, and so I also created this one where you start out as a trainee and you work your way up to employee, supervisor, manager, and director. So everyone would start out at that level F because they would have 0 points. So they would start out as a trainee or a cadet, and then the more XPs they earn or points, they move up. So they would become an employee and then a supervisor, manager, director, etc. So that's, again, you can do a theme and then have everything kind of linked together if you choose to do that. And you can also create your own. So it could just be colors. You could have them go from orange to green to blue to red. It doesn't matter. It's all up to you. And like I said, you could also just do it traditional, just a A, B, C, D, F. Badging. So badging is an extra incentive that you can also use. I guess I sort of implemented this last year, but not as much as I would have liked to. So badging can be an extra incentive to motivate your students. Badges can be physical badges that the students can collect, or they can be virtual badges. Students earn badges by completing bonus assignments, helping peers, completing work early, or for whatever reason you choose. So you could think of them like a sticker or a stamp. So it's not something like, oh, good job, you did the assignment that everyone is required to do, here's a badge. It's more extra things above and beyond that they're doing. Or maybe they were the first person to turn in their assignment, or the person who stayed and helped clean up most of the equipment. Different things like that. You can give them badges for those things. So it kind of helps them to be motivated to do more work, to help out more. But it also helps them to see like, hey, you know, if I'm doing these extra things where I'm being nice, or I'm being caring, or I'm being respectful, or I'm helping my peers, you know, I'm demonstrating these good behaviors, you can get a reward for that. And so it kind of helps motivate with behaviors as well. And then again, if you think of a theme for your course, you can match the badges to your theme. So badges could look like anything. So these are some examples of virtual badges that you could use. They could be a symbol, or they could be characters from a movie or a show, or they could just be stickers that you find at the dollar store. You can use them similar to a sticker chart, or as an extra element to go along with your gamification theme. So if you do physical badges, then I would recommend either doing something that hangs on the wall so that other students can see it, or maybe they all have their own folder and they keep their sticker chart in the folder, and then they get their badges and they can put that on their folder, or on their chart in their folder. And again, use what you're comfortable with. So if you're a Harry Potter fan, or a Marvel fan, sports fan, Lego fan, or just knowledgeable about a certain topic, you can use that. Use something that gets you excited, because that's also going to help get your students excited. So if you're a huge Harry Potter fan and you are all about, you know, the different houses and different things like that in the movies, use that. If it's something you're passionate about, use that, and it'll help your students be passionate as well, even if they're not interested in it. But seeing how excited you get as the teacher is going to make them more excited as well. So implementing games and simulations. Don't recreate the wheel. Use games that are already available online, and then add supplemental materials if you need to. So here are a few websites that I found that have different games. These are more specific to health. So health games that you can use. There's a lot of games out there, especially now with a lot of schools doing distance learning and hybrid learning. A lot of games are out there that you can use, you can find. And let's say you're doing something in health, you're working on the reproductive system, and you want your students to really know certain parts of that. Maybe you find a game that talks about it, but it doesn't have all the pieces. That's totally fine. You can use that game, but then again, just add in those extra pieces that you want to make sure your students also know about. Make sure you play the games before you have your students play them. That is, I mean, it's just like if you play a movie in the class, you want to watch it before you show it to your students, just to make sure that one, it's appropriate for your students, and two, so you know what content is being covered in the games. So keep calm and gamify. Have fun with gamification, and your students will too. Use only the parts of gamification that you want to use and that you're comfortable with. If you prefer to use a traditional grading system, you totally can. You can also use a gamified grading system and convert it to traditional grades for your grade book. So maybe the students only see that gamified grading system, but then because you're using Infinite Campus or whatever you're using, and you have to go and put actual grades in, letter grades, then just make sure you're able to convert it back and forth to those traditional grades. And then the more comfortable you get with gamification, the easier it will become to implement in your classes, and you'll be able to become more creative with your ideas as well. There's a lot of websites out there that talk about gamification, so if you just Google it, you can find some ideas. You can, I think even on Teachers Pay Teachers, there are some gamification things on there that you could maybe go take from other people. So like I said, don't recreate the wheel, make it easy for yourself, and you can figure out what works in your class and what works with your students specifically. So like I said, some of my students would not be able to do all of the gaming elements, but I just wanted to get them started on it. And hopefully as they mature and they understand the concept of gamification, they can keep going and get more comfortable with it as well. So next steps, make sure that you tell your students your course is going to be structured this way so they have an idea of what to expect. You don't want to just spring it on them and then have them be like, this is awful, I'm not doing this, and then it discourages you, and then you want to give up because you're like, well, if my students don't like it, I can't do it. But if you give them an idea of what's going to happen and just give them what the expectation is, then they will be more understanding. And let them know it's all right to not like video games, but they should also be open-minded. By allowing your students to choose the level of work they submit, you're differentiating your instruction. They will still be required to meet those minimum expectations, but they'll have the opportunity to be more creative. Implement actual games and simulations into your courses. Like I said, there's a lot of online resources. This Bartel test of gamer psychology. So my professor that used the gamification in college, she actually had us all take this as one of our first tasks in the class. We had to figure out what kind of gamer we were. So you can take it and it would tell you prefer games that are maybe more puzzle-like, or you prefer games that are mystery, or maybe you like first-person shooter games. It will give you answer questions and it gives you what kind of a gamer you are. So that would be super helpful to know about your students. I mean, knowing what kind of a learner they are. Are they a visual learner, auditory learner? Things like that is helpful for you as a teacher. Same with this. So if you're going to implement gamification, it's super helpful to know what kind of a gamer your students are. And if you want to know more or need any help with implementation, you can talk to me. I am happy to help. Like I said, I'm super passionate about it, and I love helping come up with creative ideas and ways to implement gamification into your classes. So here is my contact information, my email and Twitter. And now I'm going to jump over to what I used in my classes this last year, so you can see that as well. This is some of my students' gamer tags and avatars that they created. So my students, like I said, they were able to draw whatever they wanted. They could trace something, they could use something that they already know, as long as it was appropriate. So they came up with their own gamer tags on this side, and all I did was I scanned each of their pictures and then I put them into this document so that I could show them all on the screen what they had come up with, because at first I wasn't sure if I wanted to take up a whole wall in my classroom for their pictures, but then I ended up putting them up there because they were so excited when I showed them what everyone else had created that they decided they wanted to see them all the time and comment on them and show their friends. So I ended up putting them up on the wall, but this is what they had created. And like I said, some of the students, they chose to copy or trace images. So here's one. He used his Chromebook and just looked up the Air Jordan logo and then turned the brightness all the way up and put his paper on there and drew the picture. That is all of their images. And I didn't want my students knowing whose was whose, so I didn't have them put their real names on any of the images, but they did put their gamer tags on there. Had some technical difficulties there, so hopefully that showed up for the last few seconds. So this is what I use to keep track of points for my students. So I actually started at my school right at the beginning of December, so I didn't start implementing the gamification right away. And then when I realized all the behavior issues that I had with my students, I decided, okay, we're going to start doing gamification, and you're going to earn points, and I will give you a prize because I just need to bribe you to get through this. And It worked, and I was able to get my students to participate and be more engaged in class. So you'll see at the top of my screen here, I said my students need to earn 75 points in order to get a prize. And I just had like a bin of some dollar store toys and things, pencils, erasers, things that my students could use at school, and that I figured they probably liked to use as a motivator for them. So these are the 5 areas that my students could earn points in each day. So if they entered the room quietly, which you'd be surprised, they often did not enter the room quietly. So a lot of times they didn't get points for that. If they sat in their assigned seat, they also really struggled with that. Respecting peers and staff, no more than 3 redirects, and then complete their work. So I did this so that it was all or nothing for the most part. Here I did give a 0.5. Some days the students would be super motivated at first. They would get their work done, and then they'd get distracted because they were on their Chromebooks watching YouTube videos, and they didn't complete all of their work, but they got a good portion done when they were working on it. So I did give half credit for that. But things like entering quietly, you either come in quietly or you don't. So you get a point or you don't. Sitting in your assigned seat, if I ask you to move seats, or if you're working in a different area because you're working in groups, I still count that as long as they're not roaming the halls, they're not walking around my classroom, they are focused and staying in their area that they should be in. I gave them a point for that. If they were respectful to their peers and staff, they were able to earn points. And then no more than 3 redirects, which was tough because a lot of times, as you can see here at the beginning, they did not earn very many points at all. And I also gave them the opportunity to earn bonus XPs each day. And I had a list of things that they could do to earn bonus points. I'll show you that as well. But I always would say how many points total they got and how many points total they could get. So each week, if we had 5 days of school that week, they could earn a total of 25 points, plus if they got any bonus points. And then I did our 2-week total, 3-week total, so on and so forth. So you'll see some students, they were able to get more points. They did a lot better. This was more motivating for them. Other students, not as many points. And so you can see it really varied, and some days students would do really well, some days they would not. If students were absent, so if I had a student who was absent, I didn't feel that they should lose points, so I just gave them 1s for that entire day that they were absent. It was just easier for me to calculate their points that way rather than trying to say, okay, you only could have earned 20 points this week instead of 25 because you were gone one day. Again, this was just kind of, I put it together super fast because I was in a panic mode of, I got thrown into this class part of the way through the year. I was their 10th special ed teacher in 2 years. They only had 2 special ed teachers in the building, so they went through a lot of teachers, and so because of that, they had a lot more behaviors, and so I just really struggled with some of these students, but this really helped to motivate them, and they did get a lot better over the course of time. They were way more motivated when they got to see what the prizes were, and every once in a while I would throw in some Takis or hot fries. Not that I condone it, but again, I really just struggled with getting them to sit and listen and be respectful to their peers and not fight and things like that. So it was more of a sink or swim situation for me, I guess. So the next thing I will show you is what I also posted on the wall with them. This is also what I had posted on the gamification wall. I had all of their avatars, I had those leaderboards, and then I had this gamification rules sheet. So ways to earn XPs. And I went over this with them a few times. So when I first initially showed them what it was, I went over it. And then if I realized, this This week has been a struggle. Most of them aren't sitting in their seats. They're being disrespectful. It's just constant fighting. I would go over it again and say, hey, you guys, I know you can do this. I know you know what the expectations are because they're right here on the board. And I would just go over them with them again and say, did all of you enter the room quietly? Think to yourself, yes or no. Do you think you should earn that point for today? Are you currently sitting in your assigned seat? Yes or no. Do you think you should earn that point for that day? And so I just would kind of go through these with my students, and I would point out, because a lot of my students were motivated by what their peers were doing. A lot of my students would look to see, well, I'm not working on my worksheet because she's not working on her worksheet. Or, hey, my friend is actually doing his work and it's more fun to do it with someone else. So if I'm getting my work done and my friend is getting his work done, cool, we get extra points. So I tried to use it a lot with my students because of that reason. They were very much extrinsically motivated, and they struggled to be intrinsically motivated. So I used it a lot more that way for them. I just tried to make sure it was friendly competition and that they were being positive about everything, making sure I teach them good sportsmanship, because a lot of times with my students, they get competitive, and even if they win, they still act out and they're violent. So it was a struggle, but once they were able to get the idea of things, then things settled down, and it worked out really well for me. So ways to get bonus XPs. I told them they could help a friend, they could quietly read a book after their work is done, or they could complete an extra worksheet after their work is done. So I had a stack of just extra worksheets up front. They could do maybe riddles or word search or different educational worksheets that they could work on. I also had coloring sheets in my classes, but I used those more as a stress relief and a break. Kind of like, okay, if you feel you're getting amped up and you need to take a break, you can go sit in a corner quietly and color. You're not going to get points for it, but it's going to help you, so then you feel better and you can get back and focus on your work. So yeah, these are all of the things that I have implemented with gamification. And this year I'm hoping to do some more, especially with us. My district is doing distance learning again this year. And so I'm hoping it works out again for me to do gamification because, like I said, it was really motivating for my students. And they really liked earning those points and getting to create their own avatars and kind of make it a personal thing for themselves. So feel free, ask me any questions if you ever have any questions, and hope you try out gamification. Thanks.